Hello 19 tháng 7 2024. Có hai cái. Thứ nhất là hôm tuần này thì mình có ở công ty mình có một bạn từ bên Úc sang. Thì bạn ấy chơi cả tuần. Thì hôm qua mình đi ăn với bạn đấy. Bởi vì mình nghĩ là hôm nay mình sẽ bận livestream rồi, cho nên là mình quyết định hôm qua đi ăn. Và mình đi có 3 người mình, bạn đấy với một bạn trong công ty nữa, là 3 người. Thì bây giờ nghĩ lại thì thấy mình timing rất là tốt đấy. Thứ nhất là mình thích cái kiểu là ăn nhóm nhỏ, bởi vì là hôm nay đi ăn này thì sẽ đông, mà đi kiểu ăn ở cái chỗ cũng ồn ào á, nhóm chắc tầm mấy người, 7-8 người gì đấy. Thì về số lượng người là mình thích cái này. Thứ hai là đấy, như mình vừa nói, là không bị vướng cái lịch của mình ngày thứ sáu. Và thứ ba ấy là quan trọng này, đó là trời ngoài bây giờ đang mưa rất to luôn. Có nghĩa là nếu mà hôm nay mà mình đi ăn ấy thì là dính mưa. Trong đó hôm qua thì trời rất là ok, trời mát mẻ luôn. Cái thứ hai nữa là đợt vừa rồi thì mình nghỉ tập gym cũng chắc phải 2 tuần chắc được tập được 2 buổi. Nhưng mà quan trọng hơn nữa là trước đấy một thời gian khá là dài, vài tháng trời, mình tập thưa thớt này là một này, và mình bỏ chạy bộ ấy. Nói bỏ thì không hẳn, nhưng mà cũng tập chạy rất là liều tiều. Lý do bởi vì là mình bị đau chân, và tính đến bây giờ là cả năm rồi đấy, hơn 1 năm rồi. Mình nhớ là tầm tháng 6 năm ngoái là mình bị trẹo chân, và đến bây giờ nó vẫn chưa khỏi. Hôm nọ chạy cỡ 10 mấy cây 12 cây, thì 1-2 hôm sau là bắt đầu thấy nhức nhẹ. Thì đấy, vừa là chạy ít mà vừa là tập ít. Thế là mình thấy mình lên cân nhiều, và cũng như là cái bụng nó to ấy, có mỡ nhiều. Thế là cách đây 2 hôm mình quyết định đi đăng ký tập gym ở cái chỗ gần nhà, tập một cách nghiêm túc hơn. Thì hôm nay mình tập được buổi thứ 2 rồi. Không, mới hôm qua, mới sáng hôm qua mình đi đăng ký, và hôm nay tập buổi thứ 2 rồi. Và đợt này mình muốn tập trung một chút cho đến tháng 9. Bây giờ còn 58 ngày, tính đến hôm nay là còn 58 ngày là mình sẽ... Ủa, 58 ngày à? Tham minh ghê vậy. Bởi vì là mình đăng ký gói 2 tháng 60 ngày, và hôm nay là còn 58 ngày là mình sẽ đi Bali, event của công ty. Thì đó, mình có dự định là trong 2 tháng này mình tập sẽ nghiêm túc để xem là cái sự phát triển nó như nào. Mình cũng quay lại là xem người hiện tại nó như nào, và hiện tại và cái trạng thái của 2 tháng sau nó sẽ ra sao. Rồi, quay lại chủ đề chính hôm nay là xem clip của Lex Fridman. Thì hôm nay mình sẽ xem nốt cái này. Xem là 1 tiếng 56 phút rồi. Sẽ xem nốt. Nhầm màn. Ok, bắt đầu.
What was it like trying to get stuff done in Washington? In this place where politics is a game, it feels that way, maybe from an outsider perspective. And you go in there given some of those stories, trying to help people. What's it like to get anything done?
It's an incredible cognitive lift.
Cognitive là gì? Nhận thức.
That's a nice way to put it, yeah.
To get things done. You know, there are a lot of people who would prefer to cling to the problem and their talking points about how they're going to solve it, rather than sort of roll up their sleeves and do the work it takes to build coalitions of support and find people who are willing to compromise and move the ball. And so it's extremely difficult. And, you know, Jared and I talk about all the time, it probably should be, because these are highly consequential policies that impact people's lives at scale. It shouldn't be so easy to do them, and they are doable, but it's challenging. You know, one of the first experiences I had where it really was just a full grind effort was with tax cuts and the work I did to get the child tax credit doubled as part of it. And it just meant meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting with lawmaker, convincing them of why this is good policy, going into their districts, campaigning in their districts, helping them convince their constituents of why it's important, of why childcare support is important, of why paid family leave is important, of different policies that impact working American families. So it's hard, but it's really rewarding. And then to get it done, I mean, just the child tax credit alone, 40 million American families got an average of $2,200 each year as a result of the double.
Mấy năm trước của mình nhìn khác nhỉ. Cân nặng là một chuyện nhưng mà cái mặt nhìn khác hẳn luôn á.
An average of $2,200 each year as a result of the doubling of the child tax credits. That's one component of tax cuts.
When I was like researching this stuff, you just get to think the scale of things, the scale of impact is 40 million families. Each one of those is a story, a story of struggle, of trying to give a large part of your life to a job while still being able to give love and support and care to family, to kids, and to manage all of that. Each one of those is a little puzzle that they have to solve, and it's a life and death puzzle. It's a
Xem tiếng có bị vọng không? Bị vang không chứ nhỉ?
The child tax credits, that's one component of tax cuts.
When I was like researching this stuff, you just get to think the scale of things, the scale of impact is 40 million families. Each one of those is a story, a story of struggle, of trying to give family to kids, and to
Xem tiếng có bị vọng không? Ok, ngon luôn.
you can lose your home, your security, you can lose your job, you can screw stuff up with parenting, so you can mess all that up, and you're trying to hold it together, and government policies can help make that easier, or can in some cases make that possible. And you get to do that at a scale not of like 5 or 10 families, but like 40 million families, and that's just one thing.
Yeah. The people who shared with me their experience. And, you know, during the campaign, it was what they hoped to see happen. Once you were in there, it was what they were seeing, what they were experiencing, the result of the policies. And that was the fuel, you know, on the hardest days, like that was the fuel. Child tax credit. I remember visiting with a woman, Brittany Houseman. She came to the White House. She had 2 small children. She was pregnant with her third. Her husband was killed in a car accident. She was in school at the time. Her dream was to become a criminal justice advocate. That was no longer on the table for her after he passed away, and she became the sole earner and provider for her family. And she couldn't afford childcare. She couldn't afford to stay in school. So she ended up creating a childcare center in her home. And her center was so successful because in part of different policies we worked on, including the child care block grants that went to the state. She ended up opening additional centers. I visited her at one of them in Colorado. Now she has like a huge focus on helping teenage moms who don't have the resources to afford quality childcare for their kids, come into her centers and programs. And, you know, it's stories like that of the hardships people face, but also what they do with opportunity when they're given it, that really like powers you through tough moments when you're in Washington.
What can you say about the process of like bringing that to life? So the child tax credits, so doubling them from 1,000 to 2,000 per child. Well, like, what are the challenges of that? Getting people to compromise. I'm sure there's a lot of politicians playing games with that, because maybe it's a Republican that came up with an idea or a Democrat that came up with an idea, and so they don't want to give credit to the idea. And there's probably all kinds of games happening where when the game is happening, you probably forget about the families. Each politician thinks about how they can benefit themselves. If you get like the serving part of the role you're supposed to be in.
There were definitely people I met with in Washington who I felt that was true of. But, you know, they all go back to their districts, and I assume that they all have similar experiences to what I had, where people share their stories. So there'd be something really cynical about thinking they forget, but, you know, some do.
You help get people together What's that take? Trying to get people to compromise, trying to get people to see the common humanity.
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to be willing to talk with them. So, one of the policies I advocated for was paid family leave. We left and 9 million more Americans had it through a combination of securing it for our federal workforce. I had people in the White House who were pregnant who didn't have access to paid leave. So we want to keep people attached to the workforce, yet when they have an important life event like a child, we create an impossibility for that. Some people don't even have access to unpaid leave if they're part-time workers. And so that, and then we also put in place the first ever national tax credit for workers making under $72,000 a year, where employers could then offer it to their workers. That was also part of tax cuts. So, part of it is really taking the arguments as to why this is good, smart, well-designed policy to people. And, it was one of my big surprises that on certain policy issues that I thought would have been well socialized, the policies that existed were never shared across the aisle. So people just lived with them, maybe in hopes that one day they would have the votes to get exactly what they want. But I was surprised by how little discussion there was. So I think part of it is be willing to have those tough discussions with people who may not share your viewpoint, and be an active listener when they point out flaws and they have suggestions for changes, not believing that you have a monopoly on good ideas. And I think there has to be a lot of humility in architecting these things, and a policy should benefit from that type of well-rounded input.
Yeah, be able to see, like you said, well-designed policies. There's probably like the details are important too. Like there's just like with architecture, and you walk the rooms, there's probably really good designs of policies, like economic policy that helps families, that delivers the maximum amount of money or resources to families that need it, and is not a waste of money. So like that, there's probably really nice designs there, nice ideas that are bipartisan, that has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with just great economic policy. Just great policies. And that requires listening.
Requires trust too. Like I learned tax cuts was really interesting for me because I met with so many people across the political spectrum on advancing that policy. I really figured out who was willing to deviate from their talking points when the door was closed and who wasn't. And it takes some courage to do that, especially without surety that it would actually get done. Especially if they've campaigned on something that was slightly different. And, not everyone has that courage. So through tax cuts, I learned the people who did have that courage. And I went back to that well time and time again on policies that I thought were important. Some were bipartisan. The Great American Outdoors Act is something, it's incredible policy.
I love that one.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's one of the largest pieces of conservation legislation since the national park system was created. And, over 300 million people visit our national parks, the vast majority of them being Americans every year. So this is something that is real and beneficial for people's lives, getting rid of the deferred maintenance, permanently funding them. But there are other issues like that just weren't being prioritized, modernizing Perkins CTE, and vocational education. And it's something I became super passionate about and help lead the charge on. I think in America for a really long period of time, we've really believed that education stops when you leave high school or college. And that is not true, and that's a dangerous way to think. So how can we both galvanize the private sector to ensure that they continue to train workers for the jobs they know are coming, and how they train their existing workforce into the new jobs with robotics or machinery or new technologies that are coming down the pike. So galvanizing the private sector to join us in that effort. So whether it's the legislative side, like the actual legislation of Perkins CT, which was focused on vocational education, or whether it's the ability to use the White House to galvanize the private sector. We got over 16 million commitments from the private sector to retrain or reskill workers into the jobs of tomorrow.
Yeah, there's so many aspects of education that you helped on. Access to STEM and computer science education, So the CT thing you're mentioning, modernizing career and technical education, that's millions of people. The act provided nearly $1.3 billion annually to more than 13 million students to better align the employer needs and all that kind of stuff. Very large scale policies that help a lot of people. It's fascinating.
Education often isn't like the bright, shiny object everyone's running towards. So one of the hard things in politics, when there's something that is good policy, sometimes it has no momentum because it doesn't have a cheerleader. So where are areas of good policy that you can like literally just carry across the finish line? Because people tend to run towards what's the news of the day, sort of to try to address whatever issues being talked about on the front pages of papers. And there's so many issues that need to be addressed. And, education is one of them that's just under prioritized. Human trafficking. That's an issue that I didn't go to the White House thinking I would work on, but you hear a story of a survivor and you can't not want to eradicate one of the greatest evils that the mind can even imagine. The trafficking of people, the exploitation of children. And I think for so many, they assume that this is a problem that doesn't happen on our shores. It's something that you may experience at far-flung destinations across the world, but it's happening there and it's happening here as well. And so through a coalition of people that on both sides of the aisle that I came to trust and to work well with, we were able to get legislation, which the president signed, passed 9 pieces of legislation combating trafficking at home and abroad and digital exploitation of children.
How much of a toll does that take, seeing all the problems in the world at such a large scale, the immensity of it all? Was that hard to walk around with that, just knowing how much suffering there is in the world? As you're trying to help all of it, as you're trying to design government policies to help all of that, it's also a very visceral recognition that there is suffering in the world.
Yeah.
How difficult is that to walk around with?
You feel it intensely. We were just talking about human trafficking. I mean, you don't design these policies in the absence of the input of survivors themselves. So you hear their stories. I remember a woman who was really influential in my thinking, Andrea Hipwell, who she was in college where she was lured out by a guy she thought was a good guy, started dating him. He gets her hooked on drugs, convinces her to drop out of college, and spends the next 5 years selling her. She only got out when she was arrested. And all too often that's happening too, that the victim's being targeted, not the perpetrator. So we did a lot with DOJ around changing that. And but now she's helping other survivors get skills and job training and the therapeutic interventions they need. But you speak with people like Andrea and so many others. And I mean, you can't not, your heart gets seized by it. And it's both, it's motivating and it's hard. It's really hard.
I was just talking to a brain surgeon. Many of the surgery he has to do, he knows the chances are very low of success. And he says that wears at his armor.
Yeah.
It chips away. It's like only so many times can you do that.
And thank God he's doing it, because I bet you there are a lot of others that don't choose that particular field because of those low success rates.
But you can see the pain in his eyes, like maintaining your humanity while doing all of it. You could see the story, you could see the family that loves that person. Just you feel the immensity of that, and you feel the heartbreak involved with mortality in that case, and with suffering also in that case, and in general in all these human trafficking. But even in helping families try to stay afloat, trying to break out or escape poverty, all of that, you get to see those stories of struggle. It's not easy. But the people that really feel the humanity of that, feel the pain of that, are probably the right people to be politicians. But it's probably also why you can't stay in there too long.
It's the only time in my life where you actually feel like there's always a conflict, right, between work and life, and making sure, I, as a woman, I'd often get asked about, how do you balance work and family? And I never liked that question, because balance it's like elusive, right? You're one fever away from like no balance,
Right.
like your child's sick one day. What do you do? There goes balance. Or, you have a huge project with a deadline. There goes balance. Like, I think a better way to frame it is, am I living in accordance with my priorities? Maybe not every day, but every week, every month, and reflecting on, have you architected a life that aligns with your priorities so that more often than not, you're where you need to be in that moment. And service at that level was the one time where you feel incredibly conflicted about having any priorities other than serving. It's finite. In every business I've built, you're building for duration, and then you go into the White House and it is sand through an hourglass, whether it's 4 years or 8 years. It's a finite period of time you have, and most people don't last 4 years. I think the average in the White House is 18 months. It's exhausting. But it's the only time when you're at home with your own children that you think about all the people you've met, and you feel guilty about any time that's spent not advancing those interests to the best of your capacity. And that's a hard thing. That's a really hard feeling as a parent. And it's really challenging then to be present, to always need to answer your phone, to always need to be available. It's very difficult. It's taxing, but it's also the greatest privilege in the world.
So through that, the turmoil of that, the hardship of that, what was the role of family through all that? Jared and the kids, what was that like?
That was everything. To have that, to have the support systems I had in place with my husband, and we had left New York and wound up in Washington. In New York, I lived 10 blocks away from my mother-in-law, who, if I wasn't taking my kids to school, she was. So we lost some of that, which was very hard, but we had what mattered, which was each other. And my kids were young when I got to Washington. Theo, my youngest, was 8 months old. And Arabella, my oldest, my daughter, was 5 years old. So they were still quite young. We have a son, Joseph, who was 3. And I think for me, like, the dose of levity coming home at night and having them there and just joyful, and it was super grounding and important for me. I still remember Theo, when he was around 3.5 years old, Jared used to make me coffee every morning, and it was like my great luxury that I would sit there. He still makes it for me every morning. I told him I'm never, even though I secretly know how to actually work the coffee machine, but I've convinced him that I have no idea how to work the coffee machine. Now I'm going to be busted, but it's a skill I don't want to learn, because it's one of his like acts of love. He brings me coffee every morning in bed while I read the newspapers, and Theo would watch this. And so he got Jared to teach him how to make coffee. And Theo learned how to make like a full-blown cappuccino.
Nice.
And he had so much joy in every morning bringing me this cappuccino. And I remember like the sound of his little steps, like the slide. It was so cute coming down the hallway with my like perfectly foamed cappuccino. Now I try to get him to make me coffee, and he's like, come on, Mom. So it was a moment in time, but we had a lot of like little moments like that were just in time, but we had a lot. He's like, come on, Mom. So it was a moment in time, but we had a lot of like little moments like that were just amazing. So
yeah, I got a chance to chat with him, and he has his silliness and sense of humor. It's it's really joyful.
Yeah,
I could see how that could be an escape from the madness of Washington, of the adult life, the quote-unquote adult life.
We really kept like our home life pretty sheltered from everything else, and we were able to do so because they were so young and because they weren't connected to the internet. They were too young for smartphones, all of these things. We were able to shelter and protect them and allow them to have as normal as upbringing as was possible in the context we were living. And they brought me like, and continue to bring me so much joy. But they were, without Jared and without the kids, it would have been much more lonely.
So 3 kids, you've now upgraded, 2 dogs and a hamster.
Well, our second dog, so we rescued him thinking we thought he was probably like part German Shepherd, part Lab is what we were told. He's now, I don't even know if he qualifies as a dog. He's like the size of a horse,
Yeah,
a small
basically a
horse,
horse, yeah.
Simba. So I don't think he has much Lab in him. I think
Yeah.
Joseph has not wanted to do a DNA test because he really wanted a German Shepherd. So he's a German Shepherd.
gigantic. Yeah, all right.
He's gigantic. And we also have a hamster who's the newest addition because my son, Theo, he tried to get a dog as well. Our first dog, Winter, became my daughter's dog as she wouldn't let her brothers play with him or sleep with him and was old enough to bully them into submission. So then Joseph wanted a dog and got Simba. Theo now wants a dog and has Buster the hamster in the interim. So we'll see.
What advice would you give to other mothers just planning on having kids, and maybe advice to yourself how to continue figuring out this puzzle?
I think being a parent, you have to cultivate within yourself like heightened levels of empathy. You have to really look at each child and see them for who they are, what they enjoy, what they love, and meet them where they're at. And I think that can be enormously challenging when your kids are so different in temperament. You know, as they get older, that difference in temperament may be within the same child depending on the moment of the day. But it really, I think it's actually made me a much softer person, a much better listener. I think I see people more truly for who they are as opposed to how I want them to be sometimes. And I think being a parent to 3 children who are all exceptional and all incredibly different has enabled that in me. I think for me, though, they've also been like some of my greatest teachers in that we were talking about the presence you felt when you were in the jungle and the connectivity you felt and sort of the simple joy. And I think for us as we grow older, we kind of disconnect from that. Like my kids have taught me how to play again. And that's beautiful. I remember just a couple of weeks ago, we had one of these crazy Miami torrential downpours. And Arabella comes down, it's around 8 o'clock at night. It's really raining. And she's got rain boots and pajama pants on, and she's going to take the dogs for a walk in the rain, which, you know, she had all day to walk, but she wasn't doing it because they needed to go for a walk. She was like, this would be fun. Yeah. And I'm standing at the doorstep watching her, and she goes out with Simba and Winter, this massive dog and this little tiny dog. And I'm watching her walk to the end of the driveway, and she's just dancing, and it's pouring. And I took off my shoes, and I went out, and I joined her, and we danced in the rain. And even as like a preteen who normally, you know, she like allowed me to experience the joy with her. And it was amazing. We can be so much more fun if we allow ourselves to be more playful. We can be so much more present. I look at Theo loves games. So we play a whole lot of board games, any kind of game. So it started with board games. We do a lot of puzzles. Then it became card games. I just taught him how to play poker.
Nice.
He loves backgammon, like any kind of game. And he's so fully in them. You know, when he plays, he plays. My son Joseph, he loves nature. And he'll say to me sometimes when like I'm taking a picture of something he's observing, like a beautiful sunset, he's like, Mom, just experience it. I'm like, yes, you're right, Joseph, just experience it. You know, so those kids have taught me so much about sort of reconnecting with what's real and what's true and being present in the moment and experiencing joy.
They almost give you permission to sort of reignite the inner child, just be a kid again. Yeah. And it's interesting what you said, that the puzzle of noticing each human being, like what makes them beautiful, the unique characteristics, like what they're good at, the way they want to be mentored. Like I often see that, especially with coaches and athletes, young athletes aspiring to be great. Each athlete needs to be trained in a different way. Like for example, with some you need a softer approach. Like with me, I always like a dictatorial approach. I like the coach to be this like menacing figure. That's when that brought out the best in me. I didn't want to be friends with the coach. Like I want to almost, like, it's weird to say, but yelled at, like to be pushed. But that doesn't work for everybody. And that's a risk you have to take in the coach context of like, because you can't just yell at everybody.
Yeah.
You have to figure out like what does each person need? And when you have kids, I imagine the puzzle is even harder.
And when they all need different things, but yet coexist and are sometimes competitive with one another. So you'll be at a dinner table, the amount of times I get, well, that's not fair. Why did you let? And I'm like, life isn't fair. And by the way, like, I'm not here to be fair. I'm like, I'm trying to give you each what you need. Especially when I've been working really hard. And, in the White House, I'd say, okay, well, now we have a Sunday and we have these hours, and I'll have like a grand plan, and we're going to make it count. And it's going to involve, hot chocolate and sleds, whatever it is that, like, my great adventure. We're going to go play mini golf. And then I come down all psyched up, all ready to go. And the kids have zero interest. And there have been a lot of times where I've been like, we're doing this thing. And then I realized, wait a second, like, sometimes you just like plop down on the floor and start playing magnet tiles, and like, that's where they need you. And so those of us who have sort of like alpha personalities, who sometimes it's just witness what they need. Don't like play with them and allow them to lead the play. Don't force them down a road you may think is more interesting or productive or educational or edifying. Just be with them, observe them, and then show them that you are genuinely curious about the things that they are genuinely curious about. I think there's a lot of love when you do that.
Also, there's
Parenting
just fascinating
anxiety.
puzzles. I was talking to a friend yesterday, and she has 4 kids, and they fight a lot. And she generally wants to break up the fights, but she's like, I'm not sure if I'm just supposed to let them fight and they figure it out,
Yeah.
or you always break them up, because I'm told that it's okay for them to fight. Kids do that. They kind of figure out their own situation. That's part of like the growing up process. But you want to always, especially if it's physical, they're like pushing each other. You want to kind of stop it. But at the same time, it's also part of the play, part of the dynamics. And that's a puzzle you also have to figure out. And plus, you're probably worried that they're going to get hurt if they're.
I think there's like, when it gets physical, that's like, okay, we have to intervene. I know you're into martial arts, but that's normally like the red line.
Yeah, sure.
Once it tips into that. But there is always that, like, you have to allow them to problem solve for themselves. Like, a little interpersonal conflict is good. It's really hard when you try to navigate something because everyone thinks you're taking their side. You have oftentimes incomplete information. It's I think for parents, what tends to happen too is we see our kids fighting with each other in a way that all kids do. And we start to project into the future and like catastrophize. If like my 2 sons are going through a moment where they're like oil and water. Anything one wants to do, the other doesn't want to do. It's like a very interesting moment. So my instinct is, they're not going to like each other when they're 25. You sort of project into the future as opposed to recognizing this is a stage that I too went through, and it's normal, and it's not building it in your mind into something that's unnecessarily consequential.
It's short-term formative conflict.
Yeah.
So ever since 2016, the number and the level of attacks you've been under has been steadily increasing, has been super intense. How do you walk through the fire of that? You've been very stoic about the whole thing. I don't think I've ever seen you respond to an attack. You just let it pass over you, and you stay positive, and you focus on solving problems, and you didn't engage. While being in DC, you didn't engage into the back and forth fire of the politics. So what's your philosophy behind that?
I appreciate your saying that I was very stoic about it. I think, I feel things pretty deeply. So initially, some of that really took me off guard, like some of the derivative love and hatred, some of the intensity of the attacks. And there were times when it was so easy to counter it. I'd even write something out and say, well, I'm gonna press send, and never did. I felt that sort of getting into the mud, fighting back, it didn't run true to who I am as a human being. Like, it felt at odds with who I am and how I want to spend my time. So I think as a result, I was oftentimes on the receiving end of a lot of cheap shots. And I'm okay with that because it's sort of the way I know how to be in the world. I was focused on things I thought mattered more. And, I think part of me also internalized. There's a concept in Judaism called lashon hara, which is translated into, I think, quite literally evil speech. And the idea that, speaking poorly of another is almost the moral equivalent to murder, because you can't really repair it. You can apologize, but you can't repair it. Another component of that is that it does as much damage to the person saying the words than it does to the person receiving them. And I think about that a lot. I talk about this concept with my kids a lot. And I'm not willing to pay the price of that fleeting and momentary satisfaction of sort of swinging back, because I think it would be too expensive for my soul. And that's how I kind of made peace with it, because I think that feels more true for me. But it is a little bit contrarian in politics. It's definitely a contrarian viewpoint to not get into the fray. Actually, somebody I love, Dolly Parton, says that she doesn't condemn or criticize; she loves and accepts. And I like that. It feels right for me.
I also like that you said that words have power. It's not, sometimes people say, well, words, when you speak negatively of others, that's just words. But I think there's a cost to that. There's a cost, like you said, to your soul. And there's a cost in terms of the damage it can do to the other person, whether it's to their reputation publicly or to them privately. It's just as a human being, psychologically. Yeah. And in the place that it puts them, because they start thinking negatively in general, and then maybe they respond, and there's this vicious downward spiral that happens that almost like we don't intend to, but it destroys everybody in the process. You quoted Alan Watts, I love him, in saying, quote, "You're under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago." So under no
nghĩa vụ, không có nghĩa vụ. Under no nghĩa vụ là sao? You under no to be the same person.
Obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago. So how have the years in DC and the years after change you?
I love Alan Watts too. I listen to his lectures sometimes falling asleep. He's got and on planes, he's got the most soothing voice. Yeah. But I love what he said about you have no obligation to be who you were 5 minutes ago, because we should always feel that we have the ability to evolve and grow and better ourselves. I think further than that, if we don't look back on who we were a few years ago with some level of embarrassment, we're not growing enough, right? So there's nothing, when I look back, I'm like, oh, I feel like that, that feeling is, because you're growing into hopefully, sort of a better version of yourself. And I hope and feel that that's been true for me as well. I think the person I am today, we spoke in the beginning of our discussion about some of my earliest ambitions in real estate and in fashion, and those were amazing adventures and incredible experiences in government. And I feel today that all of those ambitions are more fully integrated into me as a human being. I'm much more comfortable with the various pieces of my personality, and that any professional drive is more integrated into more simple pleasures. Everything for me has gotten much simpler and easier in terms of what I want to do and what I want to be. And I think that's where, my kids have been my teachers, just being fully present and enjoying the little moments. And it doesn't mean I'm any less driven than I was before. It's just more a part of me than being sort of the all-consuming energy one has in their 20s.
Yeah, just like you said with your mom, be able to let go, enjoy the water, the sun, the beach.
Yeah.
And enjoy the moment, the simplicity of the moment.
I think a lot about the fact that, for a lot of young people, they really know what they want to do, but they don't actually know who they are. And then I think as you get older, hopefully you know who you are, and you're much more comfortable with ambiguity around what you want to do and accomplish. You're more flexible in your thinking around those things.
And give yourself permission to be who you are.
Yeah.
You made the decision not to engage in the politics of the 2024 campaign. If it's okay, let me read what you wrote on the topic. Quote, I love my father very much. This time around, I'm choosing to prioritize my young children and the private life we're creating as a family. I do not plan to be involved in politics. While I will always love and support my father, going forward, I will do so outside the political arena. I'm grateful to have had the honor of serving the American people, and I will always be proud of many of our administration's accomplishments. So can you explain your thinking, your philosophy behind that decision?
I think first and foremost, it was
Philosophy behind decision.
a decision rooted in me being a parent, really thinking about what they need from me now.
Philosophy triết lý,
Your philosophy behind that
triết
decision.
lý đằng
Me
sau.
being a business. And I think it's one that you also can't dabble in. I think you have to either be all in or all out. And I know today the cost they would pay for me being all in. Emotionally, in terms of my absence at such a formative point in their life. And I'm not willing to make them bear that cost. I served for 4 years and feel so privileged to have done it. But as their mom, I think it's really important that I do what's right for them. And I think there are a lot of ways you can serve. You know, I think there's, obviously we talked about the enormity, the scale of what can be accomplished in government service. But, you know, I think there's something equally valuable about helping within your own community. And I volunteer with the kids a lot, and we feel really good about that service. It's different, but it's no less meaningful. So I think there are other ways to serve. I also think for, you know, politics is it's a pretty dark world. Like there's a lot of darkness, a lot of negativity, and it's just really at odds with what feels good for me as a human being. And you know, it's a really rough business. So for me and my family, it feels right to not participate.
So it wears on your soul. And yeah, there is a bit, at least from an outsider's perspective, a bit of darkness in that part of our world. I wish it didn't have to be this way.
Me too.
I think part of that darkness is just watching all the legal turmoil that's going on. What's it like for you to see that, your father involved in that, going through that?
On a human level, it's my father, and I love him very much. So it's painful to experience, but ultimately, I wish it didn't have to be this way.
I like it that underneath all of this, I love my father is the thing that you lead with. And that's so true. It is family. And I hope amidst all this turmoil, love is the thing that wins.
It usually does.
In the end, yes. But in the short term, there is, like we were talking about, there's a bit of bickering. But at least no more duels.
No more duels.
You mentioned Dolly Parton.
That's a segue.
Listen, I'm not very good at this thing. I'm trying to figure it out. Okay, we both love Dolly Parton.
Dolly Parton,
so you're big into live music. So maybe you can mention why you love Dolly Parton. I definitely would love to I would love to interview her. She's such an icon. She's such an incredible human.
What I love about her, and I've really come to love her in recent years, is she's so authentically herself. And she's obviously so talented and so accomplished and this extraordinary woman. But I just feel like she has no conflict within herself as to who she is. She reminds me a lot of my mom in that way. And it's super refreshing and really beautiful to observe somebody who's so in the public eye, being so fully secure in who they are, what their talent is, and what drives them. So I think she's amazing. And she leads with a lot of like love and positivity. So I think she's very cool. I hope you have a long conversation.
Yeah, she's like, okay, so there's many things to say about her. First, like incredibly great musician, songwriter, performer.
Yeah.
Also can create an image and have fun with it. You know, like have fun being herself, like over the top.
It feels that way, right?
Yeah.
Like she enjoys, after all these years, it feels like she enjoys what she does. And you also have the sense that if she didn't, she wouldn't do it.
That's right. And just an iconic country musician, country music singer.
Yeah.
There's a lot. We've talked about a lot of musicians. What do you enjoy? You mentioned Adele, seeing her perform, hanging out with her.
Yeah, I mean, she's extraordinary. Her voice is unreal. So she is, I find her to be so talented. And she's so unique in that 3-year-olds love her music. She was actually the first concert Arabella ever went to at Madison Square Garden when she was around 4. And 90-year-olds love her music. And that's pretty rare to have that kind of bandwidth of resonance. So I think she's so talented. We actually just saw her. I took all 3 kids in Las Vegas around a month ago. Alice Johnson, whose case I had worked with in the White House. My father commuted her sentence. Her case was brought to me by a friend, Kim Kardashian, and she came to the show. We all went together with some mutual friends, and that was like a very profound. It was amazing to see Adele, but it was a very profound experience for me to have with my kids, because she rode with us in the car on the way to the show, and she talked to my kids about her experience and her story, and how her case found its way to me. And I think for young children, it's very abstract, policy. And so for her to be able to share with them this was a very beautiful moment, and led to a lot of really incredible conversations with each of my kids about our time in service, because, they gave up a lot for me to do it. Actually, Alice told them the most beautiful story about the plays she used to put on in prison, how these shows were like the hottest ticket in town. Like, you could not get into them. They always extended their run. And but for the people who were in them, a lot of those men and women had never experienced applause. Nobody had ever shown up at their games or at their plays and clapped for them. And the emotional experience of just being able to give someone that, being able to stand and applaud for someone, and how meaningful that was. And she was showing us pictures from these different productions. And it was a beautiful moment. Alice actually, after her sentence was commuted and she came out of prison, together we worked on 23 different pardons or commutations. So the impact of her experience and how she was able to take her opportunity and create that same opportunity for others who were deserving and who she believed in was very beautiful. So anyway, that was an extraordinary concert experience for my kids to be able to have that moment.
What a story. So just that's the sort of the because
And then here we are dancing at Adele.
exactly. It's like that turning
6
point.
years later, it was almost to the day. 6 years later.
So that policy, that meeting of the minds resulted in a major turning point in her life and Alice's life, and now you're dancing with Adele.
And now we're at Adele.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned also I've seen commutations where it's an opportunity to step in and consider the ways that the justice system does not always work well. Like in cases when it's nonviolent crime and drug offenses, there's a case of a person you mentioned that received a life sentence for selling weed.
Yeah.
And it's just it's like hundreds of thousands of people are in the federal prison and jail in the system for selling drugs. That's the only thing, with no violence on their record whatsoever. And it's obviously there's a lot of complexity. There's the details matter, but oftentimes the justice system does not do right in the way we think right is. And it's nice to be able to step in and help people, and direct.
They're overlooked and they have no advocate. Jared and I helped in a small way on his effort, but he really spearheaded the effort on criminal justice reform through the First Step Act, which was an enormously consequential piece of legislation that gave so many people another opportunity. And that was amazing. So working with him closely on that was a beautiful thing for us to also experience together. But in the final days of the administration, you're not getting legislation passed. And anything you do administratively is going to be probably overturned by an incoming administration. So, how do you use that time for maximum results? And I really dug in on pardons and commutations that I thought were overdue and were worthy. And my last night in Washington, D.C., the gentleman you mentioned, Corvin, I was on the phone with his mother at 12:30 in the morning, telling her that her son would be getting out the next day. And it felt really, it's one person, but you see with Alice, the ripple effect of, the commutation granted to her and her ability and the impact she'll have within her family, with her grandkids. And now she's an advocate for so many others who are voiceless. It felt like the perfect way to end 4 years, to be able to call those parents and call those kids in some cases and give them the news that a loved one was coming home.
And I just love the cool image of you, Kim Kardashian, and Alice just dancing on an Adele show with the kids. I love it.
Well, Kim wasn't at the Adele show,
Okay,
but
got it.
She had connected us. It was beautiful.
Yeah,
it was really beautiful.
The way Adele can hold just the badassness she has on stage.
Oh,
like she does like heartbreak songs like better than anyone. Or no, it's not even heartbreak. Like what's that genre of song? Like Rolling in the Deep, like a little anger, a little love, a little like something, a little attitude, and just like one of the greatest voices ever. All of that together, just her by herself.
Yeah.
I
You
bet
can
you would-
strip it down
Yeah, you just
and the
strip it down.
power of her voice. You know, I think about that. One of the things we were talking about live music, one of the amazing things now
Đoạn này hay nhỉ, tự dưng chèn vào khi mà Lex đang nói, nhưng mà nó một cách rất là tự nhiên, rất là nhẹ nhàng.
herself.
Yeah.
I
You
bet
can
you would-
strip it down.
voices ever. All of that together, just her by herself.
Yeah.
I
You
bet
can
you would-
strip it down
Yeah, you just
and the
strip it down.
power of her voice. You know, I think about that. One of the things we were talking about live music, one of the amazing things now is there's so much incredible concert material that's been uploaded to YouTube. So sometimes I just sit there and watch these like old shows. We both love Stevie Ray Vaughan, like watching him perform. You can even find old videos of like Django Reinhardt.
You got me.
I got you.
Me, Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Texas Flood.
We had this moment, which is hilarious, that you said like one of the songs you really like of Stevie's is Texas Flood.
Well, my bucket list is to learn how to
It's
play
a
it.
bucket list. It's just a bucket list item. You made me feel so good because for me, Texas Flood was the first solo on guitar I've ever learned. Because for me, it was the impossible solo.
Yeah.
And then that was so I worked really hard to learn it. It's like one of the most iconic sort of blues songs, Texas blues songs. And now you made me fall in love with the song again. Want to play it out live, or at the very least put it up on YouTube. And that's because it's so fun to improvise. And when you lose yourself in the song, it truly is a blues song. You can have fun with it.
I hope you do that.
Throw on a
And
Stevie Ray Vaughan hat.
regardless, I want you to play it for me.
100%. 100%.
But he's amazing, and you know, there's so many great performers that are playing live now. You know, I just saw a Chris Stapleton show. He's an amazing country artist.
He's too good.
He's so
That
good.
guy is so good.
Lucas Nelson's one of my
Lucas Nelson's
favorite to
amazing.
see live. And there's so many incredible songwriters and musicians that are out there touring today. But I think you can go online and watch some of these old performances. Like Django Reinhardt was the first, because I torture myself, was the first song I learned to play on the guitar. And it took me like 9 months to a year. It was, I mean, I should have chosen a different song, but Où es-tu, mon amour, one of his songs was, and it was like finger style, and I was just going through and grinding it out, and that's kind of how I started to learn to play, by playing that song. But to see these old videos of him playing, you know, without all his fingers and the skill and the dexterity. One of my favorite live performances is actually, who really influenced Adele, is Aretha Franklin. And she did a version of Amazing Grace. Have you ever seen this video?
No.
I cried. Look up, it was in LA. It was like the Temple Missionary Baptist Church. Talk about stripped down. She's literally just listen to this.
But you could do one note and you could just kill it. The pain, the soulfulness.
The spirit you feel like in her when you watch this.
That's true. Adele carries some of that spirit also, right?
Yeah. And you can take away all the instruments with Adele and just have that voice. And it's so commanding and it's so amazing. Anyway, you watch this and you see like the arc of also the experience of the people in the choir and them starting to join in. And it's amazing.
I love watching Queen, like Freddie Mercury, Queen performances.
Yeah.
Like in terms of vocalists and just like great stage
Well,
presence.
that Live Aid performance
Yes.
is considered one of the best of all, I
I've
think.
watched that so many times. He's so cool.
Here, wait, pull up that for a second. Go to that part where he's saying Radio Gaga and they're all mimicking his arm moves. It's so cool.
Look at that. Oh,
So
man,
good.
I miss that guy.
So good.
So that's an example of a person that was born to be on stage.
So good. Well, we were talking surfing, we were talking jiu-jitsu. I think live music is one of those kind of rare moments where you can really be present. Where something about the anticipation of choosing what show you're going to go to and then waiting for the date to come. And normally it happens in the context of community. You go with friends and then allowing yourself to sort of fall into it is incredible.
So you've been training jiu-jitsu.
Yes, trying.
I mean, I've seen you do jiu-jitsu. You're extremely you're very like athletic. You know how to use your body to commit violence. Maybe there's better ways of phrasing that, but anyway,
It's been a skill that's been honed over
yeah,
time.
yeah. I mean, what do you like about jiu-jitsu?
Well, first of all, I love the way I came to it. It was my daughter. I think I told you this story. She's at 11. She told me that she wanted to learn self-defense and she wanted to learn how to protect herself, which I just, as a mom, I was so proud about because at 11, I was not thinking about defending myself. You know, I loved that she had sort of that desire and awareness. So I called some friends, actually a mutual friend of ours, and asked around for people who I could work with in Miami, and they recommended the Valente Brothers studio. And you've met all three of them now. They're these remarkable human beings, and they've been so wonderful for our family. I mean, first starting with Arabella, I used to take her, and then she'd kind of encourage me, and she'd sort of pull me into it, and I started doing it with her. And then Joseph and Theo saw us doing it. They wanted to start doing it, so now they joined, and then Jared joined. So now we're all doing jiu-jitsu. And
great.
for me, there's something really empowering knowing that I have some basic skills to defend myself. I think it's something as humans we've kind of gotten away from. You look at any other animal, and you know, even the giraffe, they'll use their neck. The lion, the tiger, every species, and then there's us, you know, who most of us don't, and I didn't know how to protect myself. And I think that it gives you a sense of confidence and also gives you kind of a sense of calm, you know, knowing how to de-escalate rather than escalate a situation. I also think as part of the training, you develop more natural awareness when you're out and about. And I feel like especially, you know, you get on an elevator and like the first thing people do is pick up their phone. You're walking down the street, people are getting hit by cars because they're walking into traffic. I think as you start to get this training, you become much more aware of the broader context of what's happening around you, which is really healthy and good as well. But it's been beautiful. The Valente brothers, they have this 753 code that was developed with some of the sort of samurai principles in mind. And all of my kids have memorized it, and they'll talk to me about it. Theo, he's 8 years old. He's able to recite all 15. So, you know, benevolence and fitness and nutrition and flow and awareness and balance. And it's an unbelievable thing. And they'll actually integrate it into conversations where they'll talk about something that happened. Yeah, rectitude, courage.
Benevolence, respect, honesty, honor, loyalty. So this is not about jiu-jitsu techniques or fighting techniques. This is about a way of life, about the way you interact with the world, with other people. Exercise, nutrition, rest, hygiene, positivity. That's more on the physical side of things. Awareness, balance, and flow.
It's the mind, the body, the soul, effectively, is how they break it out. And the kids can only advance and get their stripes if they really internalize this. They give examples of each of them. And my own kids will come home from school and they'll tell me examples of how things happen that weren't aligned with the 753 code. So it's a framework, much like religion is in our house and can be for others. It's a framework to discuss things that happen in their life, large and small, and has been beautiful. So I do think that like body-mind connection is super strong in jiu-jitsu.
So there's many things I love about the Valente brothers, but one of them is the how rooted it is in philosophy and history of martial arts in general. You know, a lot of places you'll practice the sport of it, maybe the art of it, but to recognize the history and what it means to be a martial artist broadly, on and off the mat. That's really great. And the other thing is great is they also don't forget the self-defense route, the actual fighting routes. So it's not just a sport, it's a way to defend yourself on the street in all situations. And that gives you a confidence in, just like you said, an awareness about your own body and awareness about others.
Yeah.
It is, you know, sadly, we forget, but it's a world full of violence, or the capacity for violence. So it's good to have an awareness of that and a confidence how to essentially avoid it.
100%. I've seen it with all of my kids and myself, how much they've benefited from it. But that self-defense component and the philosophical elements of, you know, Pedro will often tell them about like Wu Wei and sort of soft resistance and some of these sort of more Eastern philosophies that they get exposed to through their practice there that are sort of non-resistance that are beautiful and hard concepts to internalize as an adult, but especially when you're 12, 10, and 8 respectively. So it's been an amazing experience for us all.
I love people like Pedro because he's like finding books that are like in Japanese and translating them to try to figure out like the details of a particular history. Like he's like an ultra scholar of martial arts, and I love that. I love when people give everything, every part of themselves to the thing they're practicing. Yeah. People have been fighting each other for a very long time, and I love from the Colosseum on. You can't fake anything. You can't lie about anything.
Yeah,
it's truly honest. You're there, and you either win or lose. And it's simple, and that's like it's also humbling. That the reality of that is humbling.
And oftentimes in life, things are not that simple, not that black and white.
So it's nice to have that sometimes. That's the biggest thing I gained from jiu-jitsu is getting my ass kicked, which is the humbling. And it's nice to just get humbled in a very clear way. Sports in general are great for that. I think surfing probably, because I can imagine, just, face planting, not being able to stay on the board. It's humbling. And the power of the wave is humbling. So just like your mom, you're an adventurer. Are there... Your bucket list is probably like 120 pages.
But
Is there things like just pop to mind that you're like thinking about, especially in the near future? Just anything?
Well, I hope it always is long. I hope I've never like exhausted exploring all the things I'm curious about. I always tell my kids whenever they say, Mom, I'm bored. Only boring people get bored. Like there's too much to learn. There's too much to learn. So I've got a long one. I think obviously there are some like immediate tactical interesting things that I'm doing. I'm incubating a bunch of businesses. I'm investing in a bunch of companies that hopefully I'll always can continue to do that. Some of the fun things I'm doing in real estate now. So those are all on the list of things I'm passionate and excited about, continuing to explore and learn. But in terms of the ones that are more pure sort of adventure or hobby, I think I'd like to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Actually, I know I would. And I the only thing keeping me from doing it in the short term is I feel like it'd be such a great experience to do with my kids. And I'd love to have that experience with them. I also told Arabella, we were talking about this archery competition that happens in Mongolia, and she loves horseback riding. So I'm like, I feel like that would be an amazing thing to experience together. I want to get barreled by a wave and learn how to play Texas Flood. I want to see the Northern Lights. Like I want to go and experience that. I feel like that would be really beautiful. I want to get my black belt like you have.
Nice.
I asked you, how long did it take? But so I want to get my black belt in jiu-jitsu. That's going to be a longer term goal, but within the next decade. A lot of things. I'd love to go to space. Not just space. I think I'd love to go to the moon.
Like step on the moon.
Yeah. Or float, in close.
Like step on the moon.
Yeah. Or float, in close proximity, like that famous photo.
Yeah. It's just you and
the spacesuit. I feel like Mars is at this point in my life. Well, the moon's like 4 days, feels more manageable.
I don't know. But the sunset on Mars is blue. It's the opposite color. I hear it's beautiful. Might be worth it. I don't know.
You negotiate with Theo.
Yeah.
Let me know how it goes. Right? Let me know how it goes.
I think actually just even going to space where you can look back on Earth.
Yeah.
I think that just to see this little
pale blue dot,
just all the stuff that ever happened in human civilization is on that. And to be able to look at it and just be in awe. And I don't think that's a thing that will go away.
I think being interplanetary, my hope is that heightens for us how rare it is what we have, like how precious the Earth is. I hope that it has that effect, because I think there's a big component to interplanetary travel that kind of taps into this kind of manifest destiny inclination, like the human desire to conquer territory and expand the footprint of civilization that sometimes feels much more rooted in like dominance and conquest than curiosity, wonder, and obviously I think there's maybe an existential imperative for it at some point, or a strategic and security one. But I hope that what feels inevitable at this moment. I mean, you know, Elon Musk and what he's doing with SpaceX and Jeff Bezos and others. It feels like it's not an if, it's a when at this point. I hope it also underscores like the need to protect what we have here.
Yeah. And I hope it's the curiosity that drives that exploration. And I hope the exploration will give us a deeper appreciation of the thing we have back home, and that Earth will always be home, and it's a home that we protect and celebrate. What gives you hope about the future of this thing we have going on, human civilization, the whole thing?
I think I feel a lot of hope when I'm in nature. I feel a lot of hope when I am experiencing people who are good and honest and pure and true and passionate. And that's not an uncommon experience. So those experiences give me hope.
Yeah, other humans. We're pretty cool.
I love humanity. We're awesome. You know, not always, but we're a pretty good species.
Yeah, for the most part, on the whole, we do all right.
Yeah.
We do all right. We create some beautiful stuff, and I hope we keep creating, and I hope you keep creating. You have already done a lot of amazing things, build a lot of amazing things, and I hope you keep building and creating and doing a lot of beautiful things in this world. Ivanka, thank you so much for talking today.
Thank you, Lex.
Thanks for listening to this conversation with Ivanka Trump. To support this podcast, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, let me leave you with some words from Marcus Aurelius. Dwell on the beauty of life. Watch the stars and see yourself running with them. Thank you for listening. I hope to see you next time. Thank you for stars. Dwell on the beauty
of life. Watch the stars and see yourself running with them.
Stars and see yourself running with them.
Watch the star and see yourself running with them.
Thank you for listening. I hope to see you next time.
Dwell the star
and see yourself on the beauty of life. Watch the stars.
Watch the star and see yourself running with them. Thank you for listening. I hope to see you next time.
And see yourself running with them. Thank you for listening. I hope to see you next time.
Bye. Bye. Bye bye. Không, có nghĩa là mình thấy có một cái vấn đề mình đang xem những cái podcast dài như này ấy, là đầu tiên là mình không tập trung được nhiều. Thứ hai là cái mà mình rút ra ấy, nó không nhiều nữa. Không biết là do mình xem short content hay là tại mình xem cái này, nhưng mà mình nhớ hồi xưa mình xem Lex rất là nhiều luôn. Mình ngồi xem rất là chăm chú, không phải suy nghĩ đến vấn đề gì cả. Nhưng mà bây giờ mình biết là mình ngồi như này sẽ khác một chút. Tự xem một khi mà mình xem một mình, đó là mình phải kiểu tập trung rồi ngồi nghiêng này. Nhưng mà dù gì thì cái sự tập trung của mình ấy nó không còn quá lớn nữa, nên mình sẽ suy nghĩ đến cái việc là sẽ có chất lọc hơn xem những clip kiểu như này. Có thể là mình xem những clip mà Lex đã cắt ra rồi, thay vì là xem cả một cái podcast dài. Rồi, tuần sau chắc chắn là mình còn rất là nhiều thứ để xem. Và hẹn gặp lại vào tuần sau nhé. Chúc một cuối tuần bùng nổ. Bye bye.